I think it's crazy. We mine these metals in the Congo, in Canada, Australia. We refine them in China, and then we send them to the US. We use them, and then we throw them into landfill at the end of life, and then we go do it all over again and just go back to the Congo and we mine all these metals. And it's just crazy to me that metals recycling rates in the States are at about 20 to 30%, depending on the metal. So we're throwing away 70 to 80% of everything we consume, which I think is just crazy, and we need to do something much better about it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Alberto Rosende, your host and CEO of M2I Global, a critical minerals supply chain company, and this is the Minerals Metals Initiative, a podcast exploring the transformation of the critical minerals supply chain as we race for global resilience, from mineral extraction and refinement to policy and innovation. Join us each episode as we examine a different aspect of the urgent push to modernize, diversify, and de-risk the world's critical minerals supply chain. Welcome back, everyone. On today's episode, we will be discussing metals recycling, which has grown in importance within the critical minerals supply chain and has evolved into a key component of our national security strategies, especially as we seek solutions to circumvent China's chokehold on the globe's rare earth industry. To speak with us today about the current state of metals recycling, we have Hugo Schumann, the CEO of EverMetal Capital and CEO USA of Elemental Group. EverMetal owns and operates technology-enabled recycling companies that enhance supply chains of critical metals. And Elemental is truly a global company that is focused on developing and implementing cutting-edge technologies for processing, recovering, and refining strategic industrial and precious metals. Hugo, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Alberto. Great to be here.
Do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about what Elemental and what EverMetal does?
Just a bit about me. I'm kind of a rehabilitated mining executive. I was 20 years in the mining industry, digging holes in the ground in far-flung parts of the world. And at some point in my career, decided maybe I could do something a bit better for society, and got into the metals recycling space. Actually, through the copper mining space, I got into a processing business that then took me in a different direction in my career, more into technology and circularity. And in the last few years have been building a couple of businesses. So the one is EverMetal, which we'll talk about today. It's the world's first critical metals recycling platform, the dedicated roll-up strategy to acquire and build critical metals recycling companies in the States. The second is I'm also the CEO of Elemental Group's US operations. So Elemental is a global recycling powerhouse, one of the biggest e-waste and platinum group metal recycling companies globally. We have several businesses in the US that I oversee, and it's a group that's originally out of Poland, and I run the US operations.
As we look across the space and I look to the US, it seems like there's a great opportunity in the US to really get something going. I don't think it's very well developed yet. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunity and what you see the marketplace is to build that circular economy in the US?
I think it's crazy. We mine these metals in the Congo, in Canada, Australia. We refine them in China, and then we send them to the US. We use them, and then we throw them into landfill at the end of life, and then we go do it all over again and just go back to the Congo and we mine all these metals. And it's just crazy to me that metals recycling rates in the States are at about 20 to 30%, depending on the metal. So we're throwing away 70 to 80% of everything we consume, which I think is just crazy, and we need to do something much better about it. So that's really my focus. The metals recycling industry has a reputation of being kind of scrappy, as the name suggests, difficult, not very well managed. And I really think that in the next decade, it's going to move from this kind of negative image to being an absolutely critical part of the global supply chain. And we have the technology now to do these things economically. And at Elemental, we're very successful at extracting metal out of e-waste and platinum group metal elements. And I just think this is the beginning of a wave. And I want to ride that wave and create businesses and really play a big role in the evolution of this metals recycling space.
I look at the critical minerals opportunity, so to speak, whatever the business size is. I mean, it's several hundred billions of dollars worth of critical minerals that we require in the U.S. as we look across the full gamut. So, what do you think from either a virgin metal coming in or a recycled metal, if you were able to really implement the circular economy? What percentage mix would that be as a goal for you, let's say within a certain period of time? What are you thinking?
You're always going to need primary metal, mine metal, but then we came up with the name EverMetal because metals can be recycled forever. There's no limit to how many times you can recycle a metal. And I would love to, in my lifetime, see metal recycling rates go from 20 to 30% up to 70, 80%. Why not? It's hard to say how that'll end up, but certainly when you look at something like electronic waste, we are throwing away just mountains and mountains and mountains of cell phones, laptops, servers. That's just going into landfill, and you can recover all the metal out of those. So our Colt recycling facility, which is an elemental business, it's one of the biggest players in e-waste recycling in the States. We recycle more than 40 million pounds of e-waste a year. That's like 90 fully loaded Boeing 747s every year just are recycled. And there's just so much more that we can do there. And so, companies like Apple and other big OEMs are shooting for 100% recycled material, and absolutely an achievable goal with the right incentives in place.
I know that when I look back on recycling in the States and I go back to my youth and I remember raising money in high school for charitable causes by collecting paper or aluminum cans and those kinds of things. So recycling's always been there to a certain degree. But when one of my first trips to Europe, they were so far advanced where they already had the discrete different types of cans collecting different things. I know that there was infrastructure in place to collect phones and collect old computers and TVs and those kinds of things. And that's not something that I see very widely in the US. So what are some of the barriers to getting us to that point and being able to really recover a lot of that waste? What do you think those are?
That's a really great point, and it reminds me. I grew up in South Africa where we had nothing. I mean, there was nowhere to recycle your e-waste. You take it in and put it in with your regular trash, and it would go into landfill. And then I went to Europe and I learned about what happens in Norway and Sweden, where you drive your vehicle up to a depot and you put your e-waste here and you put your aluminum over there and you put your mattress over here and your fridge there, and absolutely everything is recycled. And it's just a shame we haven't reached that point in the US. What needs to happen is we need to make it easier for consumers to recycle their scrap. We need to give them the incentives. We need to have the collection points in place. Just today, I had to drive 20 minutes to go and drop off some e-waste scrap that I was carrying on my office. And it's just difficult. And then I get there and I have to pay the gentleman $25 to give him, a speaker and a bunch of cables that I know are probably going to end up at Colt anyway. so we're far away from where we need to be. And I think the way to get there is through much better incentives and through greater public awareness. There needs to be more marketing about this problem. Consumers need, when they have their e-waste and they're going to go and throw it in landfill, they need to think again. They need to know there's an alternative, that maybe instead of getting charged, they'll receive something back, and they should have an opportunity to drop it 3 to 5 minutes away from the house instead of 20 minutes.
I mean, it seems like to me, when I look at some of the charitable organizations that are out there, I think that from where I live, there's probably within, let's say, a 10-mile radius, there's probably 10 places that I could go donate anything that I want to. But there's got to be a better way to organize and structure that. And I look back at the lead acid battery recycling process that started way back in the 80s, I guess, avoiding the kind of harmful effects it would have by throwing these lead acid batteries into a landfill. So it became structured because there were some regulatory issues that came into play. And then there was a mandate within the industry that they had to collect to sell and all of that kind of stuff. Do you see any of those kinds of incentives and requirements going into place that would help us move this forward into that full circular economy?
I do, and you're bringing up the goodwills. So Colt, our e-waste business, has these relationships with the big OEMs, Dells, HPs, those kind of names, who have programs with the Goodwills. And basically, if you were to take your old laptop to a Goodwill, that would likely end up at Colt's facility and will get processed there. And so the OEM is taking an extended responsibility right through the circular supply chain to get that material back into circulation ultimately. So that kind of pressure on the OEMs to focus on that recycling and the extended producer commitments is, I think, absolutely critical part of it. And so I'd like to see more of that.
As far as the actual recycling technologies, I know that you do an awful lot of innovation and try to stay at the cutting edge throughout the group in bringing that technology into the recycling piece. Is that something that also is kind of almost a bar to really expand? It just isn't enough capacity to really accept all of the e-waste that we want to throw out at this point or get rid of?
We basically, the recycling game is all focused on volumes. How can we get as much volume as we can without having to pay too much for the scrap that we obtain? We're very technology focused at EverMetal. Within Colt and within our PGM businesses, we use some of the absolute latest technology, including optical sorting and ferrous, non-ferrous separation, and we recover 100% of different materials so there's zero waste. At Colt, we actually produce zero waste. Even the plastic is recycled. So for us, it's just how do we secure those volumes? And the volumes grow if consumers, at the end of the day, are looking to recycle more instead of throw that material into landfill.
It was interesting because we on the previous show, we were talking to Manaz Khan. I was mentioning that earlier, and I know that you were on a panel recently in Poland during the G7 summit that looked at how to develop a roadmap for that kind of recovery process. Can you talk a little bit about what the topics were that you were discussed there, and maybe some of the opportunities that you found or some of the challenges that were also kind of discussed at that point?
Yeah, we were talking about transatlantic cooperation, so cooperation between the US and the EU on critical metals recycling. Because both the EU and the US have a big problem, which is that China controls 75% plus of the downstream processing capacity of critical metals. By that, I mean, the material can be mined in Brazil or in the US or anywhere, but it all goes to China where it gets smelted and turned into final metal products. And that's the case with rare earths, with lithium-ion batteries, with most of the world's copper goes to China. And so that's all fine in a geopolitical context where everyone is friends and everyone is sort of working on a free market capitalism model. It doesn't work when you have trade wars and when China starts to curb the export of material out of its country into the US and EU. And so this has been all over the media, constantly for the last few months. What does the US and what does the EU do about this? And it's very, very challenging. Alberto, I mean, we're looking at, being decades behind China on this. China over the last few decades has been incredibly strategic. They've subsidized industries for decades, losing money while building scale to allow these big facilities to be built that are big enough to just outcompete the EU and the US massively. And when you look at things like labor costs in Europe, labor costs in the US, permitting, stringent ESG requirements, and you start to think, well, how are we going to compete with China? I mean, it's almost impossible. We can set up these supply chains, we can set up these smelters, but economically, they have to watch their face. And so the discussion in this transatlantic cooperation was how do we do that? And I've probably got a bit of a controversial view on this, which is I don't really think that it is possible to compete with China unless the government starts to subsidize some of these metal prices. And by that, I mean exactly the kind of deal that MP Materials announced with the US government a few weeks ago, where the US government said, here's $400 million of equity. We'll underwrite the price of NdPr for the next 10 years. So you go ahead and build a magnet plant, and we'll buy the material out of that magnet plant at a fixed price that'll earn you a really, really nice IRR. And That is what needs to happen in order to stimulate these businesses to run. But that means money is coming from the taxpayer. And this isn't sort of a free market capitalist solution, but it's, I think, really one of the big solutions. The other is technology breakthroughs, and that's the area that I'm most interested in. Can the US, maybe some Stanford PhD, can they come up with a technology that is 5 to 10 times better than what they have in China, which could outcompete just on a pure technical basis. And I do see a lot of interesting technologies, particularly coming out of Stanford, where I'm an alum, that I think are potentially going to help solve this problem long term.
Incredible. So everybody was looking at it in the same light, but you said you had a bit of a controversial position because you feel that it's very difficult unless these things happen, right? Unless the government is willing to do a few more of these MP material kind of deals where they take an equity position and guarantee a baseline price that allows the longevity of the organization. Because what we've been seeing is, I guess, in China's position, they've been able to crush the price on so many different minerals that doesn't allow the other companies to survive. And then they come in and undercut and buy the resource and buy the processing capability. And then in many situations, continue to leave it shut down so that they can continue to control the market, no? So somebody's got to do something to shake that up, right?
That's exactly right. They're not playing by the same set of rules as the West. We're proponents of free market capitalism, which I'm a capitalist and I like it. But when a government is massively subsidizing an industry, and allowing environmental practices that are very different to what we see in the US or Europe, very, very hard to compete with that. You look at the lithium-ion battery space is a great example of this. We've just seen in the last 6 months European attempts at creating CAM and PCAM facilities and battery manufacturing just completely implode. Billions and billions of dollars have just been sort of thrown against the wall with zero return, because China has subsidized its lithium production. So the lithium price has gone from $80,000 to now sitting at $8,000 in the space of 2 years. Anyone who built a business case around an $80,000 lithium carbonate price is now just sort of completely underwater. And then the reality of European labor issues, the cost of labor, the cost of rent, regulatory hurdles, ESG, permitting, that kind of stuff has really just sort of caught up with Europe. And China is now 90% of the world's batteries for EVs are made in China. And EverMetal, actually, we're building a battery metal refinery in Poland. It's one of the big projects on the EU's list. And we've been thinking, how do we build this refinery in a way that's competitive with China? And one option is to build it with Chinese support. So you go in and you say, hey, China Inc., come and help us build this, and we'll figure it out together in terms of the economics. But you basically use Chinese technology in Europe, and that's one option we're exploring. But obviously that has pros and cons. But it's a fascinating space, Alberto. Geopolitically, it's sort of right on message at the moment.
Right. No, it's amazing to see what the whole critical mineral space is, because it really is kind of going back to, the old days when you realize that it's the resource that really starts the whole process. And if you control the resource, then you can control everything. So when you look at, let's say, like a pure metal exchange that there really doesn't exist across the globe, the only one that exists is obviously manipulated completely. How would you address that in being able to actually have really a fair market price that isn't controlled or manipulated in any way, shape, or form, that from one day to the next you can crush an $80,000 minimum assumption to an $8,000 and everybody goes home with nothing? How would you begin to address that?
So,
that's
I think
a complex
the
problem.
underlying is no, it is, but there is a good example of how that's been done. And I'll just, for listeners, I'll just highlight the fact that we're talking about critical metals, which are small markets. Like, actually, let's call them the rare earths, right? Like the NdPr. These are very, very small markets on a global scale. When you look at a market like copper or iron ore or aluminum, those are like big markets that globally trade. It's very hard to manipulate the price of those. Gold, those sort of commodities. when you're looking at kind of rare earths, yeah, these are small markets. There's maybe 100 mines in the world, and 90% of the stuff goes to China, and so they really can. Tungsten's a good example. China can really play with the price of those metals, and has done in the past, and has done some pretty incredible things to push out competition and destroy mining projects globally so that they can retain control. So yeah, I think that's the underlying thing there. I think one market that has been very interesting to follow as an analogy is the uranium market. And so, as a reminder, uranium goes into nuclear power plants. It's enriched and then it goes into nuclear power plants. And nuclear power plants, if you look at an American utility or a UK utility, they try to buy their uranium from as many different mines globally as possible so that they can avoid being over concentrated in Kazakhstan or Russia, where a lot of uranium comes from. And so what they do is these big utilities offer mining companies long-term contract prices. So there's a spot market for uranium, and the spot market trades every day, and you can buy material in the spot market. But then there's a contract market, and it's completely different. And it's the majority of material flow that happens in this contract market. And these are 10-year, 5-year contracts between the mine and the utility, where you basically say, hey, I'll buy uranium from your mine at $65 a pound for the next 5 years. And that gives the miner confidence to say, okay, well, I can actually go and build this mine now. I can put the capex in because I know that I'm going to get $65, and that's a good deal. And the miner will keep some of their production open for spot trades, as will the utility keep some of its purchasing for spot trades, because the spot market will move around. It's kind of like optionality. But that market has worked very, very well like that over decades. And I would like to see commodities like tungsten, like the rare earth suite of commodities, trade with long-term contracts between the end user, the buyer, whether it's Ford or GM or Tesla or Apple, paying these long-term contract prices to stimulate people like myself to go and build refineries and recycling yards and to make a guaranteed return on it. And it's kind of what MP Materials have done, but it's the US government putting the money in instead of the magnet user.
Right. It seems like it's a tall order, though, to kind of go through piecemeal and figure out, who those end buyers are and how to bring them into the marketplace to make that happen away from the sourcing through China at this point.
Well, it is, but if you were to go to Ford right now and say, hey, I've got a way to make a magnet for you at commercial scale in 3 years' time, would you be interested in giving me $20 million and buying my magnets at $120 a pound of neodymium? I think they would say, hey, there's this guy here who's focused exactly on that because we can't find magnets at the moment.
Okay.
And go and chat to this person, and they'll do a long-term deal with you. And I think that's exactly what we saw the OEMs doing on the EV side when they were all trying to scramble to get lithium ion for their batteries. And I think it's just going to extend into different parts of the market with different end users. And I think it's about time, honestly, I think it's about time that the OEMs started to realize that we're in a material world. We're buying materials out of mines, out of recycling yards. There's a risk here. We can't just rely on free markets to deliver them. And they need to get their hands dirty a little bit and start to sort of play with the market, participants to try and get these materials into their factories.
I keep looking across that, and I keep looking at everything that the administration has done, because we look over time and through the past administrations, going back to before Trump won, there was a focus on critical minerals, but it really hadn't made the front page above the fold kind of a thing. And then since the end of, or really kind of when the EVs started to come up through the IRA and the BIL during the Biden administration, and then the big push that the current administration has had on it, what do you see should be maybe additional steps that might be able to be taken by the administration to help look at the recovery and recycling of material separate or within the critical mineral focus that they have? But what can they provide you as the CEO of a recycling organization?
Alberto, I think the current administration is doing a fantastic job in getting this issue into the public eye and reacting in a really positive way to what China is doing in the background and starting to stimulate different parts of the economy. So you look at these recent tariffs on copper, yeah, and they weren't particularly well thought out. They came out initially with a tariff on copper ore, which didn't make any sense, and they've now rescinded that. But on finished copper products, it makes a ton of sense because it's basically making it more expensive to import final copper products from China, which is going to stimulate people in the US to come up with alternatives. And actually today I got a call from someone who wants to start a copper recycling technology company in the States to capture, exactly this advantage. So these kind of moves, I think, really inspire entrepreneurs to kind of grab that white space in the market. I think what I'd like to see more of is funding for innovation. I'm considering at the moment with EverMetal setting up an innovation hub in the US, basically taking a space, in Texas or pretty much anywhere in the industrial heartland of the US, putting a recycling facility there, and then having contracts with technology startups where they could trial their technology at commercial scale much faster than if they would have to do it on their own and sort of approach customers and do these kind of very long drawn out sales processes. And they're really like accelerating the adoption of some of these technologies, fail fast, or either they work or they don't, and then just move on and try another one. And so that's something I'm pioneering, and I've just started the process on that. But I'd love to tap into some funding by the US government that says, hey, this is actually a really good idea. If it works with EverMetal, then let's roll it out at 50 other companies. And so things like tax incentives, fine, that's great, and accelerated write-offs of capital, which is also great and part of the new tax bill. But it'd be great to get some risk funding towards that, equity, grant funding, that kind of stuff. And I know that the DoD, so previous administration, all that funding was going into the DOE, and now it's all going into the DoD, and so it's kind of a very different mandate. But the money is certainly there. It's just a matter of finding the right people and spending the time and sort of applying for those grants.
Right. I know that there's been additional funding placed there, and I think that, I guess at this point, the DoD is trying to come up with the mechanisms to be able to put that funding out for things like initiatives like yours. I know that the previous administration started that tech hub process, and what you're talking about sounds kind of like a tech hub, but really more private driven rather than public driven, right? And involving really industry more than just research and development and some of the national labs and so forth. So I think that that's a great initiative. Have you talked to maybe some of the other locations that you're in? I know Texas is really big into that, and I know that the Army's Future Command actually came to Austin because of UT being there and being able to have that innovation space that UT provided. So I imagine that there's other organizations, other universities, or other mechanisms there that are similar that you could take a look at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just started down this road. I actually just put together a little paper on it and shared it with my team. And we've got a great opportunity to expand in Texas. So we have one of our businesses, PGM of Texas, one of the largest spent auto catalyst recyclers in the States, is based there. And then our Colt recycling business also has a location there that's just started up. And so it makes a lot of sense for us to just sort of continue to grow in Texas. But we've got operations up in New Hampshire and all over the East Coast, and Florida, and in Ohio, and so we're kind of all over the country. And we will look around as to where's the best home for this hub, and why should we put it there. But I really do, pretty much every week, a venture capital fund reaches out to me and says, "Hey, Hugo, I'm looking at this new technology for X, and it's an e-waste smelting technology, or a flash jewel smelting technology, or an optical sorting technology, or an AI sorting technology." I mean, there is so much innovation in the space at the moment. And I spent 4 years trying to scale a technology in the copper space. And we had a lot of fun. We built a $2.5 billion business in doing that in 4 years. And it was an amazing ride, but it was hard. Selling a technology to a company requires that company to take a risk on you. Right. And I can see that in my seat at EverMetal. I get all these opportunities, and I'm like, well, firstly, I'm busy. We're trying to grow this business, and we're focusing on volume, and we're focusing on our month-end close. And somebody's sort of phoning me once a day going, "Hey, can I put in a new technology to recover e-waste?" But what I'm trying to do is sort of make that process much more focused and accelerated so that some of these new technologies actually do get commercialized fast, because I think that would benefit our business significantly if we can have access to new technologies that are game changers before anyone else. That'll make a huge difference to our bottom line. And so that's really the focus. And we will involve universities. I know several universities that are doing this sort of thing, but for me it's that later stage where you've got an entrepreneur who's already gone to the university and licensed their favorite technology and then put a team around it and taken it to a TRL4, and now it's ready to go into pilot. That's kind of where I want to get these projects going.
Yeah, what you were describing almost reminded me of a book that was published by Christensen about almost 20 years ago called The Innovator's Dilemma, where you're so busy running and scaling your organization, as things come in, you say, no, it doesn't have enough scale. No, it doesn't have a good profit margin right now. I can't deal with it. But eventually that technology will overtake the industry, right? And then you get left behind. So you've got to have that way to incubate, right? And bring those new technologies in. And I think that your idea sounds fantastic. And hopefully you can get some industry partners to help you and build that. That sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a very good analogy. And I don't want to be sitting here in 5 years' time and there's a new e-waste technology that's just blown us out of the water. I want to make sure that if it comes along, we're not too arrogant. And I can see it, because you're so busy and you see so many things coming through the door and everyone's promising the world with their technology, and really hard to kind of see through the noise and say, this is one that I'm going to actually dedicate time to.
In trying to eliminate the noise from those really great opportunities, it's hard when you're trying to keep the scale business going. So it is a challenge, absolutely.
But there is a lot of low-hanging fruit. When you think about the roll-ups that we've seen, private equities coming into all these different industries, HVACs and accounting firms, and kind of done these big roll-ups, and then through that they get very professionalized, and it's all bottom line, and the kind of get rid of any excess workforce, etc. Metals recycling is the last kind of unconsolidated part of the global market, in my opinion. And you look at some of these businesses and they are very archaic. There's very little digital footprint in these businesses. There's very little data analytics. There's almost no AI whatsoever. There's very little end-to-end kind of software as a service. So for me, as a person who likes technology, I see just a huge amount of opportunity to fully automate these businesses and to bring in some of these benefits that we've seen in other industries to the table kind of now, because there's just the technology is there now. It just needs to be implemented.
And when you look at the entry point for a lot of this material, let's call it just material that comes in, when you're looking at these mom and pop small scrap yards all the way out there, they're still using carbon paper receipts and doing all of that kind of stuff. And it's getting to the point where many of these businesses are getting to the end of their succession line. So, there's a way to look at that entry point of business, looking at the technology and looking at the access that those businesses allow you in the well-populated areas, obviously. So I think that, that kind of roll-up and strategy is definitely available out there.
So you've just described EverMetal, which is a separate to EverMetal, and it's about 12 months in the making. And basically, what we've noticed is exactly that. You've got this baby boomer generation that are now reaching retirement age. They've built a scrapyard over 20 years, and maybe it was also inherited from the grandparents, in which case it's been around for 80 years. And these are great businesses. We've just bought, so we're announcing it in 2 weeks. I can't tell you too much about it, but we closed the deal on Friday last week. We bought a business that's been around for 20 years. It's a leader in its industry. It makes $10 million of EBITDA a year. It deals with very complex scrap. It's got a big moat around the business in terms of know-how and reputations and relationships. And we've been able to pick it up at like a very attractive price, because who else is looking to acquire and roll up scrap metal recycling businesses? And I can tell you, it's us. So there's not many other players around. And so our strategy is to buy several of these kind of businesses that have critical metal exposure, put them together, scale them up, run them as well as we can, kind of, trim fat, but also just grow organically and through bolt-ons, and build a really, really interesting metals recycling platform that is kind of really well-run business.
That's fantastic, and that's a great concept and a great execution model. And as long as you can get the milestones and find those locations and opportunities, but I think that they exist everywhere. I mean, you go to the large cities, and there's that one section of town where there's several, scrap yards, and they're on the last leg as far as the succession plan. They want to retire, they want to go fish in the mountains or whatever it is they want to do. And there's nobody there for the taking. A lot of those things wind up just closing because there's nobody around that wants to run them.
Oh, those are the parts of town where you'll find me staying now. I'm often, I went from staying in the Congo to now staying in the outskirts of Chicago, and that's where you find the scrap metal yards, and it's just the nicest people out there and very different. But that's funny.
They're good, honest business owners, right? And they just been able to be profitable and run a good business, but just the opportunity for it to continue isn't there sometimes. Before we close, I wanted to switch over, and I know that as you're looking at some of these opportunities, you're always looking at the partnership avenue or the partnership perspective of being able to build that. And I know that you had an announcement recently where Mitsubishi had an investment in EverMetal. I thought that maybe you'd want to talk on that a little bit and kind of just couch it based on the discussion that we've already had.
Mitsubishi, you hear their name all the time, but they're arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, kind of global powerhouse in metals trading. They trade every commodity you can think of. Doing a deal with them takes a long time. There's a period of getting to know each other that's very important. They value relationships kind of more than anything. And so it takes about 12 years 12 years, sorry. It feels like 12 years, 12 months at least to get through the door and get a deal done. EverMetal did a deal with Mitsubishi before I joined, actually, which brings them in as an equity holder in EverMetal. But really, it's about the relationship with the global Mitsubishi that is valuable. They bring lots of different things to the table. So access to finance is one, both on their balance sheet, but they also bring in Japanese banking partners, and very hard to compete with the cost of capital that Japan has as a partner. And they can offer you very, very attractive financing, but also things like trade finance, like very clever mechanisms to reduce your working capital. On the technology side, Mitsubishi has a venture arm, Mitsubishi Corporate Venture Capital, who I know very well, and they see an incredible amount of deal flow, and they're always, on our radar saying, hey, have you looked at this aluminum sorting technology like Sortera or others? And so they're bringing technology to our sort of radar. And then they've got an incredible network of other recycling partners, of smelter relationships. They are so deeply embedded into global markets that if we say, hey, we want to expand into Brazil, they're the first company you phone, because they know all the partners there that you could want to talk to, and they're very, very helpful. So we love Mitsubishi. It's an incredibly valuable relationship. They've actually given us one of their employees as a secondee who lives in Poland, and within 3 months he was fluent at Polish. And he's been a great resource. So we're big fans of Mitsubishi, and I've also been talking to them about our EverMetal strategy as well, and looking to work with them on several transactions.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know that you're busy, and I really, really appreciate the discussion that we've had and what you've brought to the table today. So before we go, I always like to ask, what's currently on your to-do list as you look towards the end of the summer and into really the beginning of the fiscal year, into 2026, if you will?
So on the EverMetal side is we want to integrate this first acquisition that we've made. So we'll announce that in 2 weeks' time, and hopefully there'll be some press about it. And it's really just the platform asset. And so what are we gonna do organically and inorganically, and what's the roadmap for the end of the year? At EverMetal, we want to bring in a partner on our e-waste business and do a roll-up strategy and grow that e-waste business through M&A, but also a lot of organic growth. So we think there's just an incredible wave of electronic equipment that's going to be needed to be recycled as we build out these data centers, and we want to be sort of really front and center of that wave. On our platinum group metal businesses, it's all about kind of consolidating the operations. We made 4 acquisitions in the space of about 6 years, and we haven't integrated them kind of all the way yet. And so we're bringing everyone onto the same systems and bringing everyone onto the same kind of KPIs and dashboards, and kind of professionalizing the way we run and sort of communicate around those businesses. And then the one I mentioned as well is just this innovation hub and sort of bringing technology into these businesses as much as we can.
Well,
So
fantastic.
that's really my focus. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'd love to see your whiteboard. I can imagine it must be crazy with all of the to-dos on there. But thanks very much for your time, Hugo. I really, really
Alberto.
appreciate it. I wish you all the best, and I hope that we'll be in touch, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do something together sometime.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Take
Thanks,
care,
Alberto.
Hugo. Thanks very
Bye.
much. And to everyone who listened or watched this episode, thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to keep enjoying the Minerals and Metals Initiative.